Hello, everyone. Welcome to Module 6 of the Foundations of the Craft course for Theophania. So let's go ahead and get started. So today we are going to be primarily talking about magic. Now I know that magic is running as a theme throughout this entire course, but today we're going to talk about high magic, operative magic, and the tools of the craft. So quickly, high and low magic are terms that we have inherited, and I kind of don't like them because it makes it sound like one of them is worthy and the other one is not. But actually, in my mind, both of these are completely necessary for living a magical life. So what is the difference in terms of these two different types of magic? The way in which I use these terms is that one of them is for the purposes primarily of two different things: spiritual evolution, like your own individual spiritual evolution, the use of magic for that. And then the other one, which is so the other part of high magic is using it for service, spiritual service for more than an individual. So when you are doing magic on behalf of a society, magic on behalf of the evolution of humanity, magic on behalf of, a larger group in some way, that all of that is typically high magic. Now, most of the time also, these are also linked in with certain kinds of methodologies, although there's some squishiness here. So one of the main kind of threads into contemporary paganism, into Wicca, does have to do with ceremonial magic. And ceremonial magic, the Western ceremonial magical traditions, they are coming out of Kabbalah, they're coming out of alchemy, some of the astrological magic, things of that nature. And so those types of methods are most commonly developed and used, although not exclusively, but for the purposes of spiritual evolution or these ideas of larger service. So operative magic, or low magic, on the other hand, tends to have roots in a lot of folk magic, sometimes shamanic practices and so forth. And the main thing there is that it has to do with an individual's just life. And that can be the practitioner's life, or it can be doing things for another person on behalf of another person, but it tends to be more of an individual focus, which does include very worthy, important things like healing traditions. The healing traditions are like low magic, which is part of the reason I don't like the term, but those are typically parts of operative magic. Now, the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, and Theophania is a coven of the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, does have as part of its mission re-enchanting the earth. And that is reawakening to a sense of wonder and relationship, and doing magic to help heal both the earth and our relationship with the earth. And not just the earth in terms of the physical nature, which is of course really important, but the earth in all of the different levels of being. So including all of the inhabitants within what we call the greater earth, which includes all of the different beings who make up this planet, including us. So I want to talk a little bit about, like, what is spiritual evolution? What do I mean by that? In this idea, all living beings, including us, are constantly growing and evolving on all levels of our being, including those parts of ourselves that are immortal. So spiritual evolution, that's the part that we're calling spiritual evolution, is when we are growing and developing in the parts of ourself that are immortal. And this happens over the course of many incarnations, is our typical belief in this. And when I say, our evolution, I mean our evolution towards enlightenment, towards apotheosis, which means becoming a god, towards being a completely perfected, rarefied human being, open in all of our potential. However it is that you understand that. It's that pathway in which we are developing on those levels. And so this, like I said, for most of us, we believe this happens over many different incarnations. Now, I do want to mention here recapitulation, because this is something that, I'm finding not as many people talk about this, and I think is useful. So human beings, when we die and then we are reborn, we, to use the poetic terms, drink from the river Lethe, which means that we forget. So when you come into incarnation as a baby, you typically do not remember much of your past, if anything. Now, I actually think more people remember than we are aware of. And I think that more people have memories unfold over time. But the point still stands that you come in and you don't remember everything that you learned from the previous incarnations. In addition to that, you don't have ready, immediate access to your big spiritual realizations from your previous lives. And you also don't have total access to all of your capacities, your spiritual capacities. So we go through a process in which these things are all latent and they have to be reactivated. So what is kind of a natural process for those of us who have been on an intentional evolutionary path is that in our teens, up through some of our 20s, usually there will be these series of big awakenings that you will have in which you suddenly have these big spiritual precepts come through, and they come to you comparatively easily, and maybe some of your capacities open and you have the abilities to do various things. And again, they come pretty easily. There are things that might trigger them, but they're coming along. And it's, if you've been on this kind of thing for a while, it's not uncommon to have, as I said, a series of these that, you know, you're not really necessarily doing a ton of hard labor for. They kind of open up. And the reason I'm mentioning that is that at some point, it stops being so easy. And then you are still maybe having big awakenings and having capacities, but you're working hard for them. And it's not uncommon for people to then get anxious about, like, am I doing something wrong? Did I, you know, I used to be so open. I used to have so blah, blah, blah. And the way in which I would understand that is you have now recapitulated to the point where you are activated to where you were at the death of your last incarnation. Your job now is the very hard work of new growth, and it usually is quite much more difficult. Now, for a whole variety of reasons, there are some people who don't have this experience when they're younger, but then when they find themselves suddenly, finally, a bit older on this path, they might have a similar kind of, you know, great awakening, great awakening, great awakening. Oh no, now it's really hard. That's just happening then because there was something, some reason why you were not, it was not appropriate for you to do that younger. And there's any number of reasons why that can be the case. But the main point is, if you have a bunch of big awakenings and it's comparatively easy, and then all of a sudden everything is really hard, that's normal. Okay, so spiritual evolution, you're kind of going through. Now, the initiatory path. Wicca, including the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, is a modern mystery religion. It is an initiatory religion. And we're not the only ones. There are other initiatory paths, but the idea here in initiation is that that is accelerated evolution, is intentionally accelerated evolution. And the mode for doing that is typically to have intentionally provoked crises that are used as catalyst for growth. And that is, you know, basically what happens in mystery religions. Now, there's a few different things here. First of all, this can happen directly from spirits without human intervention. That is certainly possible. You can do this yourself. That is certainly possible. It is not typically as safe as doing it if you are with a group of other people that have also been in an initiatory journey and therefore have gone through some of what you're going through. It is not necessarily as safe as going through a situation in which there is good scaffolding built up to help you kind of go through these crises in a more structured fashion. I am going to say this, because initiation is no joke. Initiation, real initiatory paths and initiatory rituals, when we talk to the magic, that's initiatory magic. This is stuff that is operating at the level of self that is immortal. Okay, so you want to be sure before you put yourself into a community that's going to carry you along this way of two different things. You want to be sure that they have very, very, very high ethics. that they have very high ethics, that they are good people with good values who have your care and concern at the top of their priority before, going through an initiatory journey with somebody. That it is not about their ego, it is about service to your spiritual growth. Secondly, you want to be sure that they have good judgment, because there's an awful lot of people who are very well intentioned and may even have a lot of magical chops, but don't necessarily have good judgment. You want to be sure that you have good judgment, that the people that you are working with, that they're, for one thing, it's like their lives should be pretty well in order. That should be a good indicator. You want to be able to see that they make wise decisions, because they will need to have good discernment in order to be of appropriate, safe help to you. So those are just a couple of things. At the same time, if you do find a group that you fit with and the people are have good ethics, the tradition has good ethics, and they also have a lot of practical judgment and wisdom, that you can trust their judgment, then it is usually a good bit safer to go through with that kind of guidance. Because part of what you have to do is what we call shadow work. So this is using Jungian terminology, but the idea here is that there are aspects of self, plenty of aspects of self for all of us. We all have this, where there are things that are part of us that don't match our understanding of what we should be. And therefore, we have defense mechanisms that keep us from being able to see them, but they often control us. So, you will see this in a lot of human beings, and then some of what is happening. It often happens through projection, where people are like, believing that the parts of themselves that are really causing things, that they put that on other people and project it outwards. But there's also within, it's not just the troublesome aspects. A lot of times, because frankly, we've got a pretty sick society in a lot of ways, that there are aspects of ourselves that don't match our sense of what we think we ought to be, that we have inherited, that are actually the source of tremendous power. So there's this entire piece of this that is like reclaiming and healing and integrating and making healthy the whole of the self. And so, like I said, this is deep work, and magic that is done to support any of this is frequently considered high magic. At the same time, there's also spiritual service. So in a previous video, we had talked about how we are cells and larger beings and larger beings. So when we are doing magic that is serving the evolution of the group's mind or the group's soul of humanity, or working to cleanse it from various kinds of shadow crisis, that is all also high magic when we are doing anything for the spiritual evolution of humanity and for the planet as a whole. When we are doing magic to work on healing our relationship individually and collectively with the greater earth. So those are all those beings on all aspects of reality that make up this planet. That is spiritual service. I do a lot of work about miasma. Miasma is the spiritual pollution that comes from being out of right relationship. So that can be out of right relationship with all our aspects of self. That is a large part of the initiatory path, and initiatory types of rituals is cleansing some of that. It can be miasma that is from the whole of humanity being out of right relationship with nature, or out of right relationship with the spirits, and trying to do work to cleanse that miasma, that spiritual pollution. Basically, any of these things in which we're collectively or individually out of right relationship, the issue is that pollution has to be cleansed. It has to be cleared and cleansed before there can be healing, and it takes direct intervention to do so. So any work that we're doing on that type of thing is part of this kind of magic, and there's all sorts of different magic you can do for this, and that can come from a more ceremonial, ritualistic place of a big ritual. There's also ways to do it using more of the kind of folk magic tradition, but with the purposes of serving in this way. I also tend to use a lot of magic that I do for the good of the polis, meaning for, human society or our society in general. And again, that can be either using big ritual means, or sometimes I'm using methods that would be more traditionally folk magic operational, but I'm using it for this purpose. Now, operative magic, like I said, it has its roots more in folk magic, shamanic work, so forth. And that includes some very high important things, such as a lot of healing. A lot of healing traditions are actually in this. So the purpose, though, is to create change in the life of an individual, either in your own life, which I really encourage you to all be doing a lot of that, but you can also do it as service for others. And of course, most healers, that's what they're doing. But there's really value to be had in trying to intentionally live a magical life. So finding ways to create operative magic as part of your daily experience of existence, because it will help you live with intention on all of those many different levels of being. And it also, the practice of doing operative magic as part of your daily life is what helps you develop this sense of wonder and confidence and kind of the emotional conviction of yourself as a witch. And I believe that that is what really building that is what enables you to then go forward and serve in this like higher magic way, is because you have this confidence as a witch, as a practitioner of magic, and as someone who lives an enchanted life, that you have the power and the capacity to go forward and serve in spiritual service or to evolve for your own spirit. So there's many, many different forms. And like I said, I love this. And I encourage you all to, and in the praxis section, we're going to go through this a little bit more, but be thinking about the various ways in which you can do magic, because this is where a lot of the artistry comes in, like both the craft and the artistry. And so it's a really creative aspect of this work. So these are some of the basic kind of steps, and there's lots of different ways of doing it. So first of all, there's the intention, and I'm going to go through this in a little bit more depth in the praxis. But the intention, you want to be sure that you have sufficient clarity on what it is that you really want. And that's actually sometimes can be really hard. And so rather than fixating on the very first thing that comes to you, like let's pretend for a second you have to get to work and you have an old car. And so you think, I want a new car. All right. Well, maybe you do want a new car, but let's say you specifically were wanting the reason for it was your work. All right. What you might want to do is pull out from there and try to create a bit of a balance about like your clarity and specificity and what is it that you really want. Okay, so you want transportation to work that is safe. You want transportation to work that is reliable. You want transportation to work that is affordable. You want transportation to work that doesn't take you too long to get there. You want transportation for work that fits within your lifestyle. Blah, blah, blah. You know, you come up with a list of things like that. And then, you know, you may want to be a bit open about exactly how that comes to you and exactly what form it takes. Because it may be that a new car is not actually what would be the best solution. And having kind of a, you know, I want this for my own highest good and the highest good of all, as kind of that it leaves some parameters around it that allow things to come in ways that you might not have expected. And sometimes they're better. You know, so maybe if your real issue was your work and getting back and forth to work, and suddenly they're like, you know what? You've been asking to telecommute all these years, and we've just decided we're going to let you telecommute. And then maybe you don't need that in the same way. So, you know, and it meets a whole bunch of different parameters. So trying to find that right balance between clarity and the specificity. And I really think there's something about stepping back and trying to list the functions and the things like affordable and blah, 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 list all of that out. That enables things to come to you, in my experience, in a better way. Spells usually have words. Rhyming, rhythm, so much the better. Sing-songy, awesome. You're not going to win a poetry contest, but it's not for a poetry contest. Well, you might win a poetry contest, but still, that's not the point. The rhythm and the words and getting all that out there, that's often where you want to go. Figuring out which powers you want to pull in order to help it manifest, and thinking about symbols and representations. And so by powers, I mean, like, do you want to ally yourself with particular planets, or, you know, planetary or herbs or whatever? Like, what kinds of powers do you need to pull together for this? And then there's usually a plan of like, what are your actions that you're going to take? And, you know, we'll go through this, like I said, a bit more in the praxis, but there's tons of different things. You can, you know, make a representation of something that you then are going to like throw into, like, maybe it's a well-made clay that's not going to pollute the environment, that you're then going to throw into the river and have it like disintegrated. You know, you're going to burn something, you're going to create a bag that you then have your spell in. There's all sorts of stuff, not magic. There's tons of it. And again, you know, there's all sorts of things that you can look at in tons of different books online, but to be creative. And then once you get done with the spell, you want to release it and allow it to work. And that's like the holding and silence part, because you need to give it time to manifest. And then you always have throughout all of this, it's kind of like the gratitude and assumption that has already come to you and it's on its way. That is a big part of this. So there's this construct, and you can go really, really deep in this. And this, like I said, this is a super fast introduction, but I'm giving you enough that if you want to take it and continue to work on it, you will find layers upon layers upon layers in this stuff. The Witch's Pyramid has these 4 sides. So there's to know, you know, so you pull in the knowledge of what it is, you know, that you are going to manifest and how you need to manifest it. To dare, to will, because you are using this, you are basically commanding the cosmos to help you do this. And then to be silent, which is to allow to manifest. And all of these are actually linked in with the elements. I'll just mention that real fast. To know is an air situation. To dare is water. That's, you know, it's interesting that, you know, we often think of daring or courage as being very fire, but there's a big part of this that really has to do with like daring to allow. To will is fire, and to be silent is earth, when you allow things to have kind of the form. And you can think of that as like, you know, when you plant the seeds deep under the earth and then you allow them to unfold and arise. I do want to point out a few different quick reminders here of some principles of the way in which magic works. So first of all, as above, so below. This, you know, what happens in the upper world, you'll see the same patterns in the manifest world, but there's correspondences all over the place. And so we use a ton of these in magic. Like I said, if you think of it as an art, so, you know, you can think of blue is often used for Jupiter. It's also often used for healing. There's, you know, if you're trying to draw in energy for something, you might want to use, you know, you want to draw in solar energy. Well, there's also like citrines. There's like a number of, you know, there's stones that are aligned with that. There's herbs that are aligned with that. There's colors, and kind of pulling together this poetry of the powers that you're trying to pull and have help you manifest what it is that you're trying to bring forth. Rhythm. I mean, there's rhythm in words, as I mentioned, but that's this idea that things are kind of swinging in a pendulum and there's like a natural rhythm. So figuring out how to find the appropriate mode as things are kind of moving back and forth. There's also polarity, which is, you can think of that as like magnetic polarity. So, you know, trying to figure out how to draw things to you. And complementarity is also an interesting thing. So for instance, you know, I used to use a lot of white oak bark and kava kava, because white oak bark tended to bump up the power of whatever it was with, and kava kava tended to help things manifest quickly. So a couple of herbs that I was using, and those two things have a kind of complementary action to each other. But this idea that all things have consciousness, and when you are using herbs, when you're using, you know, stones, you're also using their consciousness. You're trying to have them as an ally. And also, you know, that we are embedded in systems. And part of the reason to think about that is like, we are embedded in huge systems. So you want to be thinking about how this change that you are wanting to have happen is related to the whole systems in which you are embedded, and is that really the wise thing? Like, you know, there are times in which it is perhaps appropriate to do some weather magic, as an example, but sparingly, you know, and for the right reasons, and always double checking to be sure that it really is the correct thing to do. You know, it might make for a lovely picnic for you, but if there's a drought, then you don't want to be doing magic to discourage rain, as an example. So, you know, being aware of the systems. And then also, and I should also say in that too, it's, you know, a large part of what we're doing in magic is we are playing with laws of probability. We're trying to like increase the probability of certain things to manifest. We're trying to put a little bit of weight on the scale in one direction or another. But things are very, very interconnected and interdependent. And you know what? Like I would not spend a lot of time trying to do magic to win the lottery. There are so many people doing magic to win the lottery and doing, you know, even because prayer is a form of magic. Look at what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish. You know, you want financial stability, you want whatever. There are other ways to go about achieving some of those ends that are not as likely to where you have some more power. So part of what you're looking for then is you're looking for in these systems, where are the places that you can have your tip, where, you know, the tipping points where you can make a little bit more of a difference. That's a large part of what you're looking for. So there's also a matter of like being realistic. So excuse me. But that being said, you know, I certainly have seen plenty of things happen very well with operative magic. So looking for those places where you can put a little bit more emphasis or try to clear a bit of a pathway. But also, you know, the ethics of this. We are embedded in systems, as I just mentioned, like with weather magic. You want to be thinking about the whole system and the well-being of the system. You want to think about reciprocity, being in reciprocal relationships, and about an ethics for care. Part of this also is about being, you know, having respect for persons. And I say that because I mean, you know, obviously respect for people. And an example of this would be, don't do love magic on a person. It first of all is disrespectful towards the other person's will. And it also, I swear to you, just tends to have really bad side effects. It tends to have really bad negative ramifications. Now, that being said, can you do something on yourself to make yourself more attractive, to, you know, to play up your own good qualities? Sure. You know, that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as it's not being manipulative. Can you do magic to draw to yourself, you know, I want a partner who will see me and love me as I am, who is, you know, kind of like how you're doing a dating profile? Yeah. You know, just as long as it's not like I want that person and I'm now going to like manipulate them towards me. Can you do stuff on like, I really want to be a clear communicator so that, you know, yeah, any of that. So just thinking about it in that way, you want to think about this, doing any kind of magic in ways that are respectful of other beings. And that includes respectful of spirit beings and so forth. Again, all things work from the inside out. So one of the things, if you have a question about like, is this really the right thing for me to be doing? Take a look at how does it feel within you in terms of the effect on your own character? Does it make you more loving, more tolerant, more kind, more generous, more whatever your virtues are? Or does it have the opposite effect? Anything that has the opposite effect, you know, is feeding my schadenfreude, you know, like, no, don't be doing that. So those are some of the things that you can kind of have as a quick ethical test there. So now I want to talk quickly about the tools of the craft. So First of all, a brief reminder of the elements. This is in a previous one where we talked about the powers, but we have fire, which is often related to vitality, energy, passion, things of that nature. Will, air, often related to any of the thinking, mental, but also like the pneuma, the kind of spirit that flows. And then water. We have water is the blood of the planet, so it carries and it takes the shape of whatever it's in. But it also is often like emotions and cyclicity and various things of that nature. Earth is like your foundation, your stability. The kind of deep knowledge, whereas the water, I should say, water is often like that intuitive kind of wisdom. All of these have their own kind of wisdom, but then earth is like the deep, silent knowledge. So all things are comprised of these elements, and they exist on all levels of reality. So there's the physical, astral, mental, spiritual. And the reason for us to go through this is that we tend to have a number of tools that we use in the craft that are helping us access these different pieces. So working with tools, the reason to do it is that they do help you extend and focus energy, because you direct energy through the tool, and it kind of helps. We exist on all of these different levels, and we're interacting with them all the time. If you need fire energy, then using your wand and directing it through that, it also like tunes in to specifically that part and helps you get the type and flavor of energy you're after, as an example. So traditionally, and a lot of the tools that we're going to go through, like the main four, these actually are tools coming out of the ceremonial magical tradition, and you'll see them in the tarot cards. But traditionally, you would make your own tools because they become an extension of you and your power. Some traditions, the chalice, which is the one that has to do a lot with the emotions and the heart of things, is gifted to you in some traditions. But no matter what, you want to consecrate them. You want to dedicate them and consecrate them to the purpose. So this is where, you say, this is what this is for. This is what it will always be for now. I often will run all sorts of special incense and using the smoke and do any number of things that make it sacred for you. And then also it is traditional, and it helps if you give it a name, because you're kind of making it come alive. You're enlivening it in its own type of way, where it becomes, how like in traditions, you would have the swords that would have names, and like you even have that in Lord of the Rings, which is taking that from ancient lore. There's a reason to do that, because they kind of start to have a life of their own, but they're tied, for your personal tools, tied to you. And then there are the group tools. So in a coven, for instance, you would have a set of tools that would be the coven tools that used by the coven. So they're not necessarily tied to just an energy of a person. But in the assembly, we actually have like a coven tool, which is the tool that becomes the vehicle and the embodiment of the group mind of the coven. So the fundamental tools, the ones that anyone who is ever going to become an initiate within a Wiccan tradition are going to need, there are four of them. There's the athame, which is the sacred knife. Now, in the assembly of the sacred wheel, we use that for air, just like in the tarot cards, which are the swords in the tarot cards. I have also been an initiate in a different Wiccan tradition that used the athame as fire. So sometimes you will see the athame be fire, but for us, it's air. It's what we use. And if you think about it, with the blade, the discernment and the cutting. Now, traditionally in British traditional Wicca, you would have a double-edged black hilt knife is what is traditional from British traditional Wicca. We don't have that requirement, although it does need to be double-edged. So you have your knife, your athame. The wand, which is in the assembly, it is fire. In the other tradition in which I was initiated, it would have been air. So they had those two switched. But like the tarot cards that are rods, the wand is where you can channel fire energy through it. Traditionally, it would be from the end of your elbow to the tip of your middle finger. And it should never be longer than that. That's the absolute traditional length, though. And you always want these to fit well in your hands so that, you know, the power can flow through. And for me, that's really important, is, you know, the grip of it. The chalice is water. And so, you know, typically it's like a goblet chalice. The pentacle, which is usually a wooden, sometimes it can be metal disc, like a round disc that has the circle with the 5-pointed star in it. And that is earth. And so those are the ones that you would use. Now, traditionally, we do things like casting circles with either the athame or with the wand. But you can actually do it with any of those. And it will have a very different kind of feeling tone to it. But in general, you know, you use the tools to help you connect and channel and direct energy through so that it is attuned to one of the elements with a degree of focus that is clearer and purer than if you are not using a tool, because it's almost like it's a filter, magnifier, director. You want to take it that way. Now, there are other elemental tools, which are used the same way, but they're bigger and they're usually used more for groups. The sword is like a big athame. The staff is like a big wand. So big air and big fire. The staff is traditionally, if you were to take the length of the wand and add it to your height, that's like the traditional staff size. And then a cauldron in many ways is like a large chalice, but I think it's actually a little bit more, I find the energy of a cauldron is a little bit different. It's like more transformational, I find, in that what goes into a cauldron transforms in its essence into what comes out of it. So I find the cauldron to be a little bit more of a shamanic kind of tool. And, you know, we do often use it kind of like a giant chalice, but I think it has additional potentials. So as I said, in the assembly of the sacred wheel, there are these coven tools, which would be the sword, staff, chalice, pentacles, and these hold the group mind of the coven, and they can hold coherence beyond an individual. So once you have one of the coven tools founded, then even if the individuals move in and out of the group, the tool holds the group mind, and each coven in the assembly of the sacred wheel is associated with both an astrological sign and with one of the elements. So Theophania is the newest coven at the moment in which I'm making this video, and so we do not yet have our tool. We have some of the materia gathered for it, but we have been in the midst of the pandemic, so I have not done the work of getting out and finding someone who can forge this for me for the coven. But ours is the we are the air coven of Sagittarius, so we will have a sword. There are some additional tools that you may collect. Herbal knives, so knives that you actually use to manipulate herbs, you know, including harvesting. Mirrors, especially black mirrors, as a divinatory tool, but mirrors can be a very powerful magical tool. There are any number of divinatory tools that you may use for your divination. tarot cards, again, scrying mirrors, crystal balls, any number of these things. Mortar and pestle is another kind of important tool, especially if you work a lot with herbs. And it can be a powerful tool symbolically as well for connecting to healing energies. And then, of course, there's also things like, I guess you could count them as tools. Many of us have statues and so forth that help us, enliven statues that help us connect with some of the great ones. So a few recommendations for tools is, take some time and truly make a pilgrimage to each one of the elements one at a time. And I would recommend spending a significant amount of time on each element. Like, this is the month. If I were doing the gathering of tools, I would be like, this is the month of the season or whatever, in which I am working on connecting to fire. And first I'm going to go on, this time in which I'm dedicated to learning fire and to building my relationship or strengthening my relationship with fire, that I'm going on a pilgrimage to experience fire. And by a pilgrimage, it can be something where you just set some time aside and you go someplace. Like I went on a pilgrimage. I live, blocks from the zoo. I went on a pilgrimage to water, where I went to the local creek and then I went to go see the otters. But I was going with great intention, and I spent all day. I spent time preparing. I spent a day ahead of time preparing. I spent all this time doing, purification work and all of this, in which I was going with the intention of experiencing the spirit of water. And I did that for all of the elements, but I mean, it doesn't have to be far away. It could be something where it's like my pilgrimage for fire. If I have a backyard, I am building a fire, but I'm building a sacred fire with intention. So any of these kinds of things that you can do, then have as part of your quest, either acquiring the tool, or if you already have acquired the tool, bonding with the tool, trying to figure out the naming of it, see if you can hear its own name, things of that nature. But as I said, having acquired the tools is an essential step in initiation. But I do strongly encourage spending some significant time working with each of the elements in this fundamental way, and to have that be linked to gathering your tools. So that is our theory class. I hope to see you in the praxis, where we're going to go through a little bit more on specific spellcasting.